The idea for our afternoon session is to really talk about what the value is going to be in creating an online digital identity ecosystem, and how important that's going to be for getting Canada where we want it to be, and of course the world down the line. But the important part here, and I think we're going to ask them to really tease out here, is when you have someone from the government of BC and a major leading Canadian institution and now a leading Canadian technology company building an ecosystem and collaborating together to work on something. This is not a winner takes all. This is not about one company is going to own and run the space. This is about how do we build an interconnected ecosystem. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Greg to kick us off.
No, jump right in. I mean, this is an amazing journey. You talk about how long we've all been at this. We've been at this a long time, and everyone's feeling it like it's palpable now that identity is starting to happen, and there's a way to solve the problems. The prove you are you kind of problem is a solvable problem, and just thrilled to be working with these kinds of folks and getting it solved.
So Greg, why don't you take a moment just to introduce yourself and explain what you've been working on most recently?
Yeah, so I mean, you guys hopefully have all used Concierge and logged into the federal government using that. Anyone use that? I mean, in the room, how many people? Yeah, we have. Awesome. Yeah, people get that user IDs and passwords are too hard to remember, and banks do a good job of keeping that safe. And so you'll see a lot more about this Verified Me solution that Franklin talked about this morning. The whole idea of we need an ecosystem that brings in telcos, provincial governments, other providers of data to let all of us prove you are you or I am me with more certainty and more trust, but make it harder for the bad guy to prove that they're me. And a theme that we're kind of on recently is this foundational document. The foundational document that says I'm me is my driver's license today, but the ones my kids got when they wanted to go to bars look pretty darn good. And so in this world of technology, how do we make that better? How do we make it go?
Very good. Yeah. Rizwan?
Well, Rizwan Khalfan, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at TD Bank, and as Aaron mentioned, I've been on this journey for a few years. I've always felt this is about us as consumers, as citizens of Canada, and it's about untapping the digital economy in Canada, and that's where my interest came from. And a very wise man once told me that what's good for Canada is good for TD. And that's how I started working, with Aaron on this file to say, look, we've got a real opportunity here. Not too many times, we can see that, as a nation, we are collaborative. We're nice to each other. We can actually work with each other. And here was an opportunity to really lead, on a global basis, and I jumped at it. Now, it's taken a lot longer than I thought. I did lose all my hair in the process, but I think we are at the cusp of actually basically unveiling a solution that's going to be the envy for the rest of the world. And I think there's a real opportunity for the rest of the world to follow, the pattern, the platform, the standards that we've set as a nation. So hopefully we get a chance to talk about that.
Absolutely. Ian, please fill us in on what's been keeping you busiest and your current role in BC.
Yeah, so I'm Ian Bailey, Assistant Deputy Minister in the Office of the CIO for the province of British Columbia, and as of Friday now the acting government CIO. We did get started very early in British Columbia on identity management. I think a good colleague of mine, Peter Watkins, and I really started talking about what kind of an identity ecosystem was going to be needed in the future, and this was about, I think, around 2002.
Oh my God.
So that's how long.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how long. So we were early, and I mean, it's so exciting now, especially, I would say, in British Columbia, we're on track to have issued a services card to all British Columbians. In February, we'll have finished that 5-year rollout.
Wow.
I think it does.
Yeah.
And the card's important today, but really what we've established of lasting value is first in legislation that gives us the authority to be a digital identity provider. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we will now have a very high quality database of people's identity based on the foundation documents that Greg mentioned. So we have this foundation of how we can support an ecosystem. I was just had lunch actually with Canada Health Infoway, and we were talking about the role of a chiropractor, which is a small business owner, is an employee, is a patient, and is a citizen. And without an ecosystem, we can't really provide them the services that will make sense for them as an individual. They need to be able to do all of their personal business, their professional business, their work business within this single ecosystem. I think that's a really good use case that kind of, I mean, immediately you understand we need a connected system for this.
So why now, Rizwan? Like, why do we need, it wasn't important that we create an online identity ecosystem now.
Yeah, you know, I'd go back to saying, just take a look at our own lives, right? We live so much of our lives in the digital world, and that's growing exponentially. And so I'd say, you know, as consumers, as citizens, you know, we've actually found conveniences. We found experiences that are relevant to us to help live our lives. But today, I would say that, you know, as we go living our lives in the digital world, we're being asked to make trade-offs, you know, convenience versus taking risk. In some cases, we don't even understand the risk, whether it's privacy, whether it's security, whether it's identity theft. And what we want to do is, you know, before the consumer loses confidence, you know, this is the right time. This is a time where we actually can collaborate across industries. You know, take all the level of expertise that we have, you know, across the telcos, across the public sector, across banks, bring them together to create an ecosystem. An ecosystem, you know, that will protect the consumer so they can actually go on to live their lives in the digital world. Because to some extent, there's no going back. But today, you know, I think, you know, we are asking a lot of the consumers, knowingly or unknowingly, in terms of the risks they take while living their lives in the digital world.
Ian, Greg, other things to add on to that?
Well, I think it's frightening for me as someone that knows a little bit about technology to know how risky the internet is today. And the fact that I can be easily fooled by an email to give up my credit card information or my password. We need such a better secure system to do that. I mean, I think for me it's frightening, and for people that aren't as familiar with technology, I don't know what they can do to protect themselves today.
Yeah, I think, you know, the only thing I'd add to that is just if you look at cyber, right, what do people know? I think the latest stats talk about, in terms of records that are breached, or so far this year, 3.4 billion records have been breached already this year. And you think about AI clusters and the rest. These bad guys are breaking into health. They're breaking into other databases. They're finding, here's Aaron Hamilton here. Oh, and here's his mother's maiden name, and here's other stuff in other places. The citizen doesn't even know this has been breached. And then I call up my bank to get a new credit card, or I call up whatever. I can answer, you know, the bad guy can answer the questions better than we can because they've got the data from all these sources. And so we fall back on, for identity, this piece of plastic called a driver's license, right? How hard is it to get here? With IoT and what's happening in IoT, you show up at a hotel in the US and you're traveling, and what do they ask for, right? They ask for your credit card and your driver's license. And there's a camera behind that clerk every time you're checking in when you hold up your driver's license like this, which is an insecure IoT device that's recording your driver's license. If I have the data on the front of your driver's license, I could show up in Ontario or Quebec or BC, and I could say, okay, what's your driver's license number, what's your old address, what's the new one, and they'll mail one. There's a problem in this, right? This is supposed to be the gold standard, and this is me.
Yeah.
But it's not really the gold standard, and this is me. And so we tend to jump to the next shiny object, which is there's biometrics coming. And once there's biometrics, I can put my finger on my phone and prove it's me. But now they have shown if I get a picture off Facebook taken from 8 meters away, they can lift the fingerprints off and unlock your iPhone. Or the new Samsung phone with iris detection that's absolutely unbreakable, according to them. It took them 8 days. Take a photo from a distance, put a contact lens on top, and now it's you. So this ecosystem that Rizwan talks about, unless you have these strong factors, unless you have the what I know, like your bank password, unless you have a what I have where telcos are involved and we know the SIM and it's in the device and the device hasn't changed, unless you have foundational, BC has checked that this is actually me and we've checked the card and okay, when you registered Greg, this was actually you. If you don't have all of those three working together, we're not going to beat the bad guys. Like, it's just not going to happen. But if they do work together, there's a way we could open up APIs and toolkits for people to build amazing applications that give more strength and trust to all of them across Canada and save billions and billions.
So you've started creating an early ecosystem now. How are the partners selected for this project?
I don't know if we're selecting or they're self-selecting, Aaron.
Okay.
Like, I think what's happening is the banks are coming forward and saying, hey, this is a real problem. People are showing up to get credit cards. People are showing up with fake documents. How do we bring in others to help solve this? Because we can't be the only ones where it's costing us too much and there's too much risk and fraud. Telcos have the same problem. Governments have the same problem. Like, I don't know how many of you have called the government to try and get something from your CRA file and seen how long it takes to, if you can answer those questions while you're on the phone, it's just daunting, right? So it costs the country billions and billions of dollars. Every institution, it's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in the friction that we've created. And we don't actually end up with a high barrier for the bad guy getting in because they're getting the data and they're able to fake it in a real way. So we're seeing provinces coming. We're seeing health providers come to say, I need to know it's Greg, to see my records. We're seeing apartments who say, I want to know it's Greg and my credit score's over this and a background check. There's all kinds of need for this, but there's never been a way to solve it before. So, but you can feel from this conference you're doing here, which is great, people are saying, hey, this is something that has to get solved, and it's solvable. Right? We wouldn't all be here in the room today if we didn't think this is a solvable problem.
Right. Now, it strikes me that, like we have both the conceptual ecosystem, but we also have a hard ecosystem that you've been building out with the banks over the last while as well, and the banks and the governments as well. So that's not closed. That's not an open group for me to join, for example. What's that going to look like, and how's that going to feel? And how are the next partners going to be chosen to participate in that?
Yeah, I think this one. The other guys can talk to it more than I can. This whole idea is this is open, right? If you've got a provider of data, if you've got background check data, or if you've got credit data from your credit agency, and you want to be able to share it with someone with trust and security, you should be able to join. You should be able to allow that data to be shared by your customer, and the recipient should be able to receive it. So if I want to write a great app in BC for nursing practitioners to go to my dad's home, and I want to know that Nurse Susie Q is there from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I want to pay them. How do you do that, right? At the end of the day, I need the telco data to know the phone is there from 2 to 4. I need identity data to know it's really Susie Q. And then I need to be able to pay. You can't do that unless you bring together banks and telcos and governments to know real foundational parts. But if you could do all that stuff and then open it as APIs and put it in a sandbox that's all open source, that's all open to people to build on top of, then everyone who wants to build these apps that accesses health data or accesses other data can know we've got this level of security that's taking the best capabilities of everybody, taking best of province, best of telco, best of bank, best of other providers who want to come in, and then making it accessible to everyone else. So this one is much more open that way. Like the first one, the concierge, was more of a log in and use your bank credential, which really proved that people want to be able to do this public-private partnership thing. But this is, I think it's much bigger than that.
Yeah.
So,
I think this is why the standards work is so important, because if we are going to have this open ecosystem, it can't be wide open. Right? I think we have to ensure that the organizations and software developers that are involved are meeting this minimum set of standards. It has to be safe. So it can't be completely wide open, but it does need to be open. And I think, Greg, we've been talking about that now for a year now. And in BC now, we've adopted an approach on software development, which is all open source using GitHub. We have a developers exchange where we want the private sector to help us build our apps. And part of that would be being able to build apps that conform to the standards of this ecosystem.
I thought one of the neatest things that BC did was bringing in to be the CIO was someone that had run an incubator before, so he actually knew that world and knew how to stimulate and how to nurture startups through that process, because this is a whole new world, right? So, how would you describe online identity verification in today's digital age? Is it fast yet? Is it safe? Ian, take us through what it feels like right now, and maybe what you think it's going to be.
Well, I don't think it is safe. I think it is awkward. I did have to recover my password on the CRA concierge, and it wasn't particularly safe. And I didn't really want to wait the 2 weeks to get something in the mail or whatever it was. So, and I think, it's either today on the internet, it's either really password based, so a few things I know, which, we've talked about that I think here before, is the crooks actually know that information better than we know about ourselves, right? So it's a pretty weak way of doing that. One of the things that we're looking at in order to do that in British Columbia is using video chat with our contact center. Since we do have the identity information about a person, we can have a conversation in the contact center, looking at a person, talking to them to do that kind of password recovery or that identification. That's I think, a lot stronger and safer and more convenient than having to go to a counter and identify yourselves.
Absolutely. So, Rizwan, this opens up questions for you, right? So let's talk about online privacy and how your customers and consumers in general are approaching it. Are they valuing speed over privacy, like Ian was suggesting, or is it privacy over speed, or are they learning to expect both?
Yeah, I'd say that customer expectations are continuing to grow, and you have to look at our own lives and see our expectations, our behaviors, are continuing to evolve. We are forcing the consumer right now to make a trade-off. And the informed trade-off, is, are you willing to give up speed for privacy or vice versa? I think that's a wrong approach. The world we're going into, speed is a new courtesy and is an expectation. And so why would you ask any consumer to give up one or the other? I think they should actually have a safe, secure, environment where consumers are in full control.
Right.
And I think what happens today, online, and I'll just kind of draw that online bubble rather than try and describe it, is, constantly you have these transactions going on where, depending on the transaction, consumers are being asked to make this trade-off. And the trade-off could be a number of things. And then the fraudster, to Greg's earlier point, pick up the different breadcrumbs and socially engineer how to actually, steal those digital assets. And our digital assets continue to grow. So clearly, from a bank perspective, everybody recognizes that they never give up, security or privacy, because the digital assets behind the financial records are considered of high value. But it's true for pretty much all our digital assets. Mm-hmm. And so I think going forward, we need to figure out a way to kind of say there is no trade-offs here. How do we create an ecosystem, that's safe, that protects the trust, that empowers the consumer, to ensure that they're in full control. There's a full audit trail into what they're doing, and that enables them to say, hey, I know what my digital assets are, and I'm fully protected as I go on living my life.
It's interesting that you refer to them as a digital asset. I can see that from a consumer perspective, but I wonder if each of the organizations we deal with have to start thinking about these as digital liabilities, because we have to get concerned with the ability to maintain the privacy around those and the security around those. Greg, not only focusing on that, but with that in mind, how has online privacy evolved? Are we more private, or is our privacy more protected now than it was in the past? And what's the trend?
Yeah, I think the trend is what Rizwan talked about before. People just, do I agree to the Facebook conditions or not agree? And once I say yes, I'm giving away a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't even know what I'm giving away or how to manage the settings, and I can't understand what the policy settings even mean, let alone set them the way I want. I think where we're trying to go here is to say, look, and this is the stuff we learned working with Ian and the BC folks over time building the card, right? So BC now has a card that has a chip in it. So if I show up to register for a service, I can tap the card and I can prove it's a legitimate card and it's actually in force and it's there right now. Right. But what they taught us was that card thing, that paradigm of when I show up to use that card, and today our kids use it and they go to a bar and they go to a liquor store or they go to a health provider, the recipient of that card trusts that the card is valid, but there's no way for the state to track. This one went to a cancer center, or this one went to a bar, and another bar, and another bar, right? That physical world privacy that's there because I choose what I'm going to share and where it goes has to be implemented in a digital world. Like where we're going is we're kind of moving ahead. We're going on the concierge to the next level in this new architecture we'll talk about. But it's because we need to make sure that thing that BC taught us so well is we have to maintain citizen privacy. If my bank knows I went to a cancer care center, if someone knows I went somewhere else or voting, this whole thing won't work if anyone can track where I'm going. We need to get back to the physical world kind of privacy we have, that there's no hubs or no one in the middle to be able to see that. But I can share my data where I want to. And every time it's going to ask me, hey, Greg, are you willing to share this data from TD and this data from Rogers and this data from British Columbia with this chiropractor, because you want to create service, right? And prove who you are and be able to access your records. This is exactly, for everybody in the room, we live this every day. And I talked to some of the folks in eHealth here the other day, and there's kind of like, this is their problem. The woman comes from St. Catharines and she gets treated at UHN. And then she goes home. And now she wants to see her records. Oh, well, you can get access to the UHN portal, drive back to Toronto, pay $25 for parking, show your health card, and we'll give you a password, which you won't remember, but we'll give you a password, and you can drive home to St. Catharines. At which point, you can have one password for the UHN portal. You've got one password for your doctor's office in St. Catharines. And if you use LifeLabs or someone else, you have another password to log in.
Great.
Is this the solution that we're trying to create?
No.
Right? Are we trying to make it, hey, I should be able to prove who I am, log in with things I know with my device, and see my records at UHN or see my records at Medcan or any of these others, and let the consumer be in charge of where they want to prove who they are and how do I want to access my records. Because this solution we're trying to create, this password and login everywhere, think about it as phone numbers of your friends. If you have 6 friends that you're trying to remember their phone number, and we say, okay, change them every 6 weeks, how many friends' phone numbers will you remember? It's not a solvable problem the way we've gone about it. So how do we make it accessible for everybody? Like, this is just, it's reached such a pain point that we're all here saying, how do we solve this? Because it's too hard.
It strikes me that that was actually a very painful analogy.
Sorry.
Because it's really hard. The worst thing you can do is use some of those contact aggregators, because next thing you know, they pull in all the old phone numbers of all your old friends, and you realize you've got like 19 phone numbers there, and I have no idea which one's the current one. But and if they're changing, it really makes no sense. And I follow a mnemonic, and I actually have a sentence that I say in my head in order to help me, as I go through it. And then, for whatever reason, it doesn't work one day, and you have to reset it, and now you're into trying to memorize 2 different mnemonics and 2 different sentences, and you're like, wait a second, this is just not going to scale. And if I'm taking it, I'm actually taking it seriously. My mom takes it very seriously. She has one piece of paper that she carries around with her, and I'm sure that's very secure. God
forbid she loses the paper.
Oh, don't worry. She's giving copies to everyone. Yeah. All of her kids have copies of it.
Yeah.
So this is the journey that we've been on, and we've come to this breaking point. It strikes me that one of the challenges that we're going to get into, I think, as we come to terms with that, is also that we're sharing data with these organizations, but we also don't know who they're sharing data with, and how long they're going to share data with, and how long that data is going to reside out there. And so Greg, why don't you take Rizwan, why don't you take the floor a little bit on this, because this is going to be something that you manage expectations on with your customers. I know when I go into the bank and I go to pick up a credit card, that someone writes down on a piece of paper my driver's license number, and then they tuck that into a little binder, underneath the desk. And I wonder, well, that's an interesting, and I don't necessarily mean that at every branch at TD, but you start thinking about how we're using data and where the data is going and what else it's going to be used for. Riz, where else? How are we going to start tackling this?
Yeah, I think we've actually asked a number of questions there. So
Sorry.
I'll try and.
I don't get that much time with you, so.
I know we haven't seen each other in a while, but
honestly, how are we going to manage expectations around where the data goes after you give it to someone? That's the big question.
Yeah, I think it goes back to empowering the customer and making sure that they are in full control. That their data that's being shared, hopefully over time, we're digitizing all this data, and that's already occurring. In fact, as a side note, for those of you who are interested, the AML end-to-end account opening goes into effect June 17th, which now allows all banks to open an account online end-to-end without having to walk into the branch. So typically, you would have to walk into the branch, to do a physical signature and show your driver's license, and as you described, somebody would actually write it down. But now that's, we've now gone into the more digitized world in Canada, so that's a great step forward. But what we want to do is we want to kind of, create a platform that empowers the customer or the consumer to ensure that they are, deciding who they want to share the data with. And they do it in a manner, and I think Greg will probably describe this in the architecture, that, whether it's the provider of the data or, somebody who's consuming the data, the provider and the consumer actually don't know except the consumer themselves.
Right.
So think about that for a second. That's really powerful. Like you talk about privacy, this is privacy in the digital world, where you're not only empowering and protecting the assets, the digital assets of the consumer, but you are actually empowering the consumer to say, hey, you will decide, when you share your data, with the source you share the data, and whoever is consuming, but the source and the consumer may not actually know they're sharing the data amongst themselves. The concept is double blind.
Yeah.
And I think I will basically want Greg to talk about it as we look at this solution. Now the other point, in terms of, we are starting out at a point where there is already trust, amongst consumers and certain entities. And so that was part of the reason. I think there was a question that asked, how open is this? Well, we're in the foundation phase of this ecosystem. So you really don't want to open it up to everybody on day one. The idea is that over time, as you lay the foundation, you can actually open it up to even the startups and the fintech community so they can participate and innovate experiences for consumers. Now, today, if you look at Canadians trust their banks. Canadians trust government. And so starting out there is a really good point to establish, the trust, within this ecosystem. And from there on, we'll open it up to ensure that we can kind of build and create, innovation that's, that enriches the lives of consumers. I don't know if this is a good point to talk about the architecture.
Yeah. Even without architecture, just the point that you make, Riz, is the right point, that the consumer is going to decide, am I willing to share this data with this party for this purpose? So that's one step. And the second step is, how do we minimize what that data is? Right, today, when you or your kids go rent an apartment, the landlord says, okay, I want your proof of income, and I want your credit report, and I want all these things, because they want to rent to someone who's good. And they take all that data and they put it in a very secure place, the file drawer in the office, where it sits, including a photocopy of your driver's license and other stuff to prove you're real, and the rest, right? But what if we just have to prove, hey, I'm Greg, I'm a real person, and not my credit score, but my credit's over 650. And a background check, is it good? Yes, it's clean. They don't need all the data about me to do that. The bar doesn't need to know what is my name and what is my address. They need to know I'm over 19 and here's a face. So where DIAC comes in and we're setting rules and working as an industry and setting standards comes in is, let's set the rules. Let's say, what should this provider be able to get? A health provider clearly needs a health card number, right? A bar doesn't need that. A bar needs to know you're over 19 and what's the date. So yes, consumers have consent, but the network also needs rules on what things are different parties able to ask. So we help consumers not over-answer questions.
So do we want to talk about the architecture and things, the technology like blockchain and where that's going to fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go deep into blockchain. I mean, we did concierge, and we did the work for connect.gov using a broker in the middle, where there's a hub in the middle. And then we started getting all these articles coming out of the UK and out of the US research institutes, and then NIST in the States came out and said, look, you cannot have a broker in the middle and do this. Like, there's no way you could use a concierge-like architecture. It's fine for login, but to exchange PII or private information about people. Because if you have someone in the middle, you've got someone who can track where you're going. They call it honest but curious. You've got single point of failure. If this is identity and doing healthcare in the nation, it can go down. You have all kinds of honeypots of data, like in the UK, where they say, all right, let's get providers who can actually vouch to say it's you. Well, they have a database that says, here's Greg, and here's his passport, and here's his driver's license, and here's his answers to his questions. And it doesn't matter what we think about how good our firewalls are. If we create a database that has all the information about every one of us, someone's going to break in, and they're going to get the data. And it's not going to be through the firewall. They're going to go with the person who has the keys, and they're going to say, I have your daughter, and she's not coming home unless I have the keys now. And we're going to give up the keys. So it's just a bad idea to put all the data in one place. We're better to let TransUnion keep my data about me and its thing, and TD to keep its data about me, and the BC to keep its data, and let the consumer, yes, I'd like to share these parts with this party for this purpose now, and they decide, and it gets shared. And if you have this triple blind, where the provider doesn't know where I've gone, where the recipient doesn't know that it came from TD Bank
Sure.
or other places, and the network in the middle never sees anything, so there's no data visible, then we've got a privacy model that starts to work. So people kind of look at us askant and say, wait a minute, you had the system that was running in Canada, it was running UK, the connect.gov stuff in the US, it's running the private version of UK Verify. Why would you go build a new architecture? Because it doesn't work. Hubs don't work. You need to have an open model that's open source that people can build and developers can build on the ends and lots of participants can come play. And that's what you'll start seeing coming out of Canada. Like, we think there's a great opportunity to work on a standard in Canada that everybody can participate in.
So do you want to talk a little bit more about where you see that going and how you see each of these players participating in? Maybe we'll take one at a time. John, Ian, do you want to talk first?
Well, we already have run some technical proof of concepts, and we're going to be doing more. So I mean, we were really excited when we saw the architecture, because it was really the first time that we had seen a system that could protect people's privacy in really the best ways possible, but also maintain the security of the system.
Right.
So in BC, we had done some public consultation over the services card, and we really had this difference of opinion between individuals that expected to be able to see how they used their card or their identity, and the privacy advocates saying, well, you can't store this information anywhere. So how are we going to be able to show people where they've used their information, but you can't store it anywhere? And so we, as an interim step, decided, well, for now, we're going to keep information for 30 days, and then we'll get rid of it as a compromise. But this architecture now allows us to achieve both the privacy and maintain the security of the system. So if something does go wrong, there isn't a way to unravel what's gone wrong and improve the integrity of the system still. We can't just throw all the data away.
Yeah, you can.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Rizwan, how do you see your organization playing, and what's your role going to be there?
I think it's going to be both ways. We start with the customer in the center of everything we do, and it starts with the convenience that we provide to our customers. And clearly, there is a need as we live our digital lives, whether it's renting an apartment or it's buying something online. Constantly, this trade-off that customers are being asked to make is something we want to get away from. And so the way we want to look at it is that we will be providers and consumers of this data within this ecosystem. So, the driver's license is an excellent example. We'd love to use that data. And, again, without knowing, ping the provinces and say, hey, this is the customer. He or she is trying to onboard with TD, and we want to actually check the driver's license. And the idea there would be that we'll only get the information that's necessary. At the same time, we also want to be providing this data because we have some very rich data. And as I said earlier, it's trusted data, and it's been validated on a daily basis because you interact with your bank, multiple times a day. So this data is very rich and very updated. So I'd say that we'll take the customer journey and say what's important to the customer, and then ensure that the bank plays a key role in the ecosystem, both in terms of consuming and providing data to again enrich the lives of our consumers.
If anyone noticed a bright flash in the back, that was because I believe Dr. Kavukian is smiling very, 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 very brightly right now, because we're hearing data minimization, we're hearing user-controlled, user-centric approach, we're hearing user-educated, and the consumers actually knowing what their data is being used for. This sounds like some of the main principles of privacy by design being implemented.
It is. This is, hats off to Anne. This wouldn't be here today if Anne wasn't pushing privacy by design and making it a standard here and
we're not going to date her, but we're going to say, she's been working on this for a long time.
We're believers.
Yes. So, and actually, Dr. Kavukian will be speaking to us very shortly, so we'll look forward to that. Last thoughts, Greg.
I just would say I'm thrilled that you're running this conference, Aaron. I'm thrilled that everybody is here. I think that the ability to solve identity with security, with privacy, and with efficiency, I'll make it really fast, is upon us. And I think it's on all of us to try and make Canada kind of lead the world on how do we do this.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Yeah.